The sunlight was the first to vanish, yet not because twilight had fallen, but because the sky over Coolgardie was suddenly stained the color of clotted blood. At that high noon, thousands of crows dropped dead simultaneously, littering the scorched dust with black feathers, while the deep shafts exhaled the scent of a fresh-dug grave instead of the usual stench of sulfur. One of the prospectors, lowering a bucket into a well, drew it back up brimming with thick, liquid gold, which before his very eyes curdled into viscous wood tar. The earth beneath the townspeople's feet began to emit a sound akin to the visceral growl of a starving beast, and the heavy stone houses sank a foot in a single instant, as if the Australian desert had decided to swallow human insolence whole. The silence that followed this brief shudder was heavier than any roar. An orange haze hung in the air, turning breath into torture, while the horizon, where the desert mirage usually quivered, suddenly bristled with sharp salt crystals that rose from the earth in mere seconds. People froze on the thresholds of their shops and shacks, watching as the clock hands on the town hall began to spin backward, counting down the moments until the great collapse. No one dared to scream, for everyone felt that any vibration of the air might be the final straw for a fractured reality. The gold rush that had burned in the veins of the 1880s was replaced in a heartbeat by the icy numbness of inevitable retribution. In the center of the main street, the soil began to swell like a massive abscess, oozing a thick, shimmering mist. Dogs, which only a moment ago were barking at invisible enemies, suddenly whimpered and began to claw at the ground with such frantic force that their claws were worn down to the bone. Those standing closest to the mine head frame saw heavy steel cables tighten for no apparent reason, plunging into the abyss as if something incredibly heavy and hungry down below had latched onto the cages and was dragging them toward the very core of the planet. The sound of tearing metal resembled the death moan of a giant, and this groan resonated in the bones of everyone present, causing teeth to crumble from the unbearable vibration. An old prospector, standing at the edge of the well, looked at his palms as they became covered in a fine mesh of golden scales before his eyes. He tried to scrape them off, but the metal grew through his pores, becoming part of his living flesh, replacing warm blood with a cold, inert luster. This was not the miracle for which thousands of adventurers had prayed, it was a plague born of the earth's own greed. The surrounding hills, eaten away by pits and adits, began to slowly fold in on themselves like a house of cards in a gust of wind. The desert no longer wished to endure the parasites gnawing at its flesh for the sake of yellow stones, and it was now preparing a grand finale for this spectacle of avarice. Suddenly, a column of black sand erupted from the deepest shaft, rising to a height of 500 feet. Within this vortex, the shapes of objects that could not possibly be there were glimpsed, ancient coins of non-existent states, shipwreckage, and the bones of creatures that had gone extinct millions of years before the appearance of man. This debris of ancient epochs rained down upon Coolgardie, smashing through roofs and maiming those who had not managed to hide. The air became so dense that sounds were trapped within it, turning into an indistinguishable hum. The city, built on bones and gold, began to sink into the quicksands of time, a process accompanied by a rhythmic, deafening whisper emanating from every crack in the pavement. No one noticed the thin golden threads, resembling the roots of a mythical plant, crawling out from beneath the bank's foundation. They entwined the legs of passers-by with incredible speed, stripping them of the ability to move. Those who tried to cut these bonds saw with horror that their knives dulled against the seemingly soft metal, while the threads themselves began to pulse in time with their own frightened hearts. The gold of Coolgardie had finally awakened, and it was no passive treasure, but a predator that had long feigned being prey, waiting for enough victims to fill the trap. In this hour of true terror, it became clear that the city had never belonged to men, it was merely bait in a deep burrow. When the sun finally vanished behind the bloody shroud, a darkness fell in which only the outlines of houses soaked in gold dust glowed distinctly. The ground beneath their feet finally lost its solidity, turning into a viscous substance ready to take into itself everything built above. The sound of grinding coming from the depths grew so loud that eardrums burst, staining people's faces red. It was the sound of hundreds of thousands of claws scratching against stone in an attempt to break out, or perhaps to drag this entire sinful world deeper into the embrace of eternal darkness and the unbearable brilliance of the precious depths, where a human life was worth less than an ounce of sand. By the year 1931, the steel skeleton had pierced the clouds, and events began to occur on the construction site that were meticulously expunged from official reports. The riveters, working at dizzying heights, swore that above the 80th floor, the laws of nature ceased to operate. The air there became ice-cold even on the sweltering afternoons, and thick steam escaped the workers' mouths while Manhattan melted in the heat below. In the hollow window openings where glass had not yet been set, a strange sound was born, resembling the synchronized rustle of hundreds of invisible wings or the shuffling of an infinite parchment scroll. This noise had nothing in common with the howling wind. It possessed a terrifying rhythm that triggered fits of uncontrollable trembling and robbed men of their speech. Rumors began to circulate among the laborers regarding the existence of secret intermediate levels that were entirely absent from the official blue blueprints. In the central core of the building, an elevator shaft lined with dark, matte metal was discovered, housing a single cab without a single button on its control panel. This shaft led to hidden floors locked behind massive steel doors without the slightest hint of keyholes or handles. Guards in uniforms without insignia patrolled these zones around the clock, thwarting any attempt by the curious to peer inside. Those who approached too closely were fired the following day without explanation, their names vanishing forever from the construction union rosters. From behind those doors emanated a low, rhythmic humming of vast machinery, whose vibration caused the steel beams of the frame to sing at the edge of ultrasound. Acoustic engineers, invited for consultation, fled the site in horror, claiming that the frequency of these machines had no relation to the heating, ventilation, or water supply of the skyscraper. It was the sound of something colossal and alien, the pulse of an artificial heart beating in unison with the movement of tectonic plates deep beneath the island. Every nail driven and every rivet set on these levels was installed under the supervision of men in somber black suits, who consulted not architectural plans, but ancient maps of the starry sky. One of the ironworkers, who happened to be on a technical tier at an after-hours moment, later described in private letters strange lenses made of smoky quartz being mounted inside the wall partitions. These optical devices were directed not outward, but into the corridors, as if the building were intended to focus light at specific points in space. Day by day, the structure became more closed and mysterious, transforming from a triumph of engineering into a vertical labyrinth full of traps. Shadows in the hallways began to thicken, acquiring density, and tools left overnight on the secret floors were found by morning covered in a layer of fine silvery dust that glowed in the dark and slowly corroded the skin. By the time the main work on the spire reached completion, the aura of the Empire State Building had become so heavy that residents of neighboring blocks began to complain of collective nightmares. In these dreams, what towered over the city was not a tower of stone and steel, but a giant bone tree whose roots delved into time itself. The newspaper moguls who had invested millions in the construction maintained a deathly silence, ignoring reports of mystical occurrences and accidents that more closely resembled ritual sacrifices. The skyscraper stood ready, piercing the sky with its tip, and only the initiates knew that the true purpose of its creation would begin only when the first click of the activated mechanism echoed through the empty halls of the secret floors. The official opening on May 1, 1931, was a triumph of human will, yet few knew that an icy terror lurked behind the festive facade. The city began to die from within the very moment the president pressed the button to ignite the lights while hundreds of miles away in Washington. He feared the building's inexplicable aura and refused to cut the ribbon in person, as if sensing that such a gesture might close a circuit never meant to be broken. The skyscraper stood vacant for years, earning the nickname the Empty State Building, yet its hollow floors lived a life of their own, one that was utterly terrifying. At night, when all of New York sank into slumber, the upper tiers of the building would suddenly glow with a ghostly emerald light that pulsed in time with an invisible heart, causing the tower's steel skeleton to vibrate with the excess of accumulated energy. Elevator operators working the night shifts whispered of strange passengers dressed in heavy velvet coats and frock suits of centuries past. These figures would enter the cabs on the first floor, exuding the scent of ozone and ancient dust, and vanish without a trace before reaching any officially recognized residential or office level. When the elevator doors opened on the 101st or 102nd floor, only an empty cab saturated with a sticky cold would be found. The building functioned as a giant capacitor, drawing lightning from across the entire eastern seaboard during storms, yet the electrical discharges did not bleed into the ground. They were absorbed into the spire, causing every rivet and every beam to glow with an unearthly fire that triggered fits of baseless panic and nausea in pedestrians on Fifth Avenue. The limestone facades began to cover themselves with a network of fine cracks that resembled not accidental damage, but the swollen blood vessels of a massive organism. By June of 1936, a thick, golden suspension mixed with fine, sharp quartz began to ooze from the water taps on the upper floors. The few tenants who had risked renting offices on the lower tiers fled the building in haste, abandoning furniture and documents, driven by a rising hum from the foundation. This sound, emanating from beneath the earth, resembled the grinding of giant millstones pulverizing reality itself. The city surrounding the skyscraper began to feel the weight of its presence. Domestic animals wailed while staring at the spire, and people complained of voices coming from telephone receivers even when the wires had been cut. The skyscraper transformed into a vertical crypt where the only sound was a rhythmic, mechanical thumping coming from the locked elevator shafts. Those brave souls who attempted to infiltrate the secret floors in search of answers vanished without a trace, leaving not even a fingerprint behind. Only their shadows remained on the corridor walls, eternally etched into the marble cladding by a powerful burst of unknown radiation. These silhouettes, frozen in poses of eternal flight, served as a silent warning to anyone who dared disturb the peace of the 13th or 88th tiers. The building no longer imitated an office center, it had become a monument to greed and fear, towering over Manhattan as a warning that certain boundaries must not be crossed, even for the sake of an empire's greatness. By the mid-30s, the Empire State Building had definitively become a zone of exclusion in the very heart of the metropolis. Police patrols tried not to look up as they passed its base, and birds bypassed the spire in a wide arc, as if sensing an invisible vortex drawing time itself into its maw. Inside the empty halls, the air became so dense that sounds became trapped, turning into an indistinguishable hum in which the dates of future catastrophes and the names of the unborn victims could be heard. The building breathed, and this breath was cold, smelling of steel and eternity. It waited for its hour, slowly digesting the city's energy and transforming it into something for which human languages had not yet devised a name. Gradually, the tower became not just a symbol of New York, but its silent and merciless overseer. Decades passed, and by the year 1945, the world had grown accustomed to the monumental silhouette on the Manhattan horizon, unaware that its steel heart continued to beat in time with different, extraterrestrial cycles. On a foggy July day, a military bomber that had lost its orientation crashed at full speed into the 79th floor. The impact should have reduced that section of the building to flaming ruins, but witnesses to the catastrophe froze in horror at what they saw. At the moment of collision, the steel beams and limestone slabs became absolutely transparent for a split second, exposing a hidden internal architecture. Instead of office partitions, a complex system of giant lenses made of smoky quartz and golden mirrors was revealed inside the frame, all pointed strictly upward into the thickest of the storm clouds, as if the building were preparing to focus an invisible beam. The aircraft did not destroy the structure, it was as if it were consumed by it. The metal of the fuselage melted into the floor's structure without a trace, and the spilled fuel flared up only to be instantly extinguished, absorbed by the porous stone that greedily swallowed the fire. The investigation into this disaster was classified by the government within 24 hours, and all civilian witnesses were given the strictest orders to remain silent. The damaged sections of the facade were restored with incredible speed, using materials that were not supplied to any other construction site in the country. The 102nd floor, which officially served as an observation deck, was closed to the public from that point on under the pretext of repairs, becoming a site of pilgrimage for a narrow circle of individuals who knew that the spire was not merely an antenna. Rumors circulated that the top of the skyscraper had transformed into a transmitter tuned to signals emanating from the icy void between distant stars. At night, when the moon bathed Fifth Avenue in a deathly light, a distinct whisper of 1,000 voices would rise from the elevator shafts, arguing in languages that had not been heard on earth since the fall of Babylon. These voices did not pray for salvation, they business-like-ly recounted invisible riches and discussed the trajectories of celestial bodies, interrupted by a gruesome, choking sound, like the splash of mercury against granite. The air around the spire was constantly in motion, forming perfect ringed vortices within which the temperature rose so high that snowflakes turned to steam before touching the metal, and rainwater flowed down in transparent, glowing tears. Deep underground, within those very foundations poured with concrete in the year 30, life continued in a distorted and frightening form. Secret technical levels, marked on no map of New York, pulsed with static tension. There, behind steel doors without handles, vast mechanisms of copper and obsidian rotated in an eternal dance, maintaining the stability of the anomalous field. If any of the maintenance staff accidentally wandered onto these floors, they found a space that did not obey the laws of geometry. Corridors could stretch for miles, even though the building itself was only 1 block wide. Shadows here had weight and volume, and footsteps echoed hollowly in the void, awakening an ancient echo that whispered the names of those who had sacrificed themselves for the construction of this steel ziggurat. By the year 1950, the Empire State Building had definitively ceased to be just an office building, transforming into a living mechanism of control. Engineers working on secret communication facilities noticed that radio waves passing through the spire changed their structure, acquiring properties of suggestion. The entire city became an unwitting participant in a grand experiment. The building absorbed the emotions of millions of people, their fears and hopes, processing them into pure energy for its internal needs. Those who worked inside the tower for decades gradually changed, their skin acquired a gray, waxy hue, and their movements became frighteningly synchronized. The skyscraper did not just stand in the center of the city, it was slowly dissolving the city into itself, preparing for the final act of its great destiny. In our present day, a modern researcher, who had devoted years to decoding those very wax cylinders and studying the anomalous zones of Manhattan, uncovered the final truth that made his blood run cold. Taking advantage of prolonged maintenance in a technical elevator shaft, he managed to penetrate that very hidden level which existed on no blueprints of the year 2026. Expecting to find dusty archives or abandoned machinery, he discovered something that lay far beyond the boundaries of human understanding. Instead of a floor and walls, a colossal mechanism of pure, pulsating gold appeared before his eyes, occupying the entire space of the gargantuan hall. It was a living machine composed of thousands of intertwined human limbs, coated in the thinnest gilding that vibrated in rhythm with the planet's electromagnetic field. Thousands of slender fingers, covered in a precious patina, sifted through invisible coins in the air in perfect synchronization, creating that legendary clinking that pedestrians on Fifth Avenue mistook for the city's noise. Every movement of this mass of bone and metal was subject to the flawless logic of an archive where every breath and every sin of the metropolis's inhabitants were recorded. At the center of this hall, upon a dais resembling a throne made of hundreds of interlaced human jaws, sat the building's first architect, whose body had long ago become part of the construction. His eyes had been replaced by 2 enormous diamonds that did not reflect light but absorbed it, emitting a cold, calculating radiance in return. The architect was motionless, yet his consciousness clearly directed the operation of the entire tower, transforming it into a giant resonator. When the beam of a powerful LED flashlight touched this altar of absolute avarice, the mechanism suddenly accelerated, shifting into a shrill, ultrasonic shriek. The researcher felt with horror as his own skin began to rapidly harden, losing sensation and acquiring a characteristic yellow luster. The process was painless but irreversible, his muscles were transforming into flexible wires, and his blood was being replaced by a heavy, glowing melt. In that moment, a blinding realization struck him: gold had never been just a noble metal or a commodity. It had always been the larva of a vast parasite, a metaphysical entity that had waited centuries for the opportunity to manifest in stone and steel, using human ambition as the nutrient medium for its growth. The Empire State Building had never been an ordinary building. It was designed as a cage within which 102 floors served as 102 seals, holding something colossal in a state of artificial slumber. With every new antenna installed on the spire, with every million tourists who visited the observation deck, the tension within this cage grew until it reached a critical point. Now, when the city was fully entangled in networks and saturated with digital signals, the building finished the process of digesting its prey. The steel had finally fused with the organic, and the parasite grown inside this vertical sarcophagus was ready to emerge onto the surface. The researcher realized that his own body would become merely the first new home for this creature, its first step beyond the limestone walls. At the very second when the researcher's consciousness began to dissolve into the golden whisper of the mechanism, all the lights of New York suddenly went out, plunging the island into primordial darkness. The skyscraper began to slowly and smoothly rotate around its axis, emitting a sound like the grinding of a giant key in the keyhole of the sky itself. 102 seals burst one after another, releasing the energy accumulated over a century. The building's spire flared with a blinding white light, piercing the clouds and opening a path for what had been waiting for its hour beneath the foundation of Fifth Avenue. The parasite awoke, and its first breath echoed in every mobile phone, in every electrical socket, announcing that the era of humans had ended, yielding to the eternal reign of the Golden God. The researcher, whose eyes had now turned into transparent diamonds, looked at the city from a bird's-eye view, feeling his new will spread through wires and cables to all ends of the earth. He no longer belonged to himself, he was part of the tower, part of the earth, and part of the greed that had built this monument. The building vibrated with ecstasy, shedding the remnants of limestone dust like useless skin. The magnificent trap, snapped shut almost 100 years ago, had finally begun its true work. Towering over the silent Manhattan was no longer just a skyscraper, but a living, shimmering obelisk of a new era, in which humanity was merely the raw material for the construction of an infinite, cold, and beautiful golden paradise.